All right, it's about 2 minutes after the hour, so we can get started. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Joe Mignano. I'm the general manager here for New Horizons in Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and Albany. We really appreciate everyone signing on to the live session today, and we appreciate those who are going to listen to the recorded version of this webinar instead. We put together this webinar. I think it's a pretty interesting topic, launching software on time the first time. A lot of people that work with New Horizons know us for helping with Microsoft Azure upgrades, Microsoft 365 upgrades. They know us for helping them earn a CompTIA certification or maybe a Cisco certification. I think what's really interesting about New Horizons is we help with a lot more different types of projects than your vendor specific upgrades or your certification specific goals within the organization. Quite frankly, we can help with any software project. And the costs very frequently of a failed software implementation or failed software launch typically far exceed the costs involved in ensuring you have the skills to manage a software launch project and make sure it goes successfully and on track and on time and on schedule the first time. So that's what we decided to put together for this webinar today. Pete O'Donnell is one of our top trainers when it comes to business analysis, Scrum, ITIL, you name it, all things business process. I'm really excited for what Pete has put together for today. And I'll turn it over to Pete to talk about this topic from here. Take it away, Pete.
All right, thank you, Joe. Appreciate it. And appreciate you, everybody taking the time to be with me today. So we're going to go over a couple of different topics, kind of cover quite a few different things, but really how it all encompasses that whole point of being able to kind of deliver things on time and truthfully, not only on time, but also of significance, right? And we'll talk about that. So I'll do a quick intro of myself. We're going to talk about what I have quote unquote is the problem, right? Some of the things that we kind of all feel and see probably consistently as we're moving through things. Then we'll talk about the three areas that is part of this package they've kind of put together here. We're going to talk about strategic business analysis. We're going to talk about eliciting and writing effective requirements. And we're going to talk about user acceptance testing and some of the things that go into that. And then we'll kind of open it up for any questions at the end. So a couple of quick things, a little bit about myself. Like Joe said, I'm an instructor. I've actually been a consultant for even longer. But even prior to that, I wore the hat that many of you guys wear. Today, I've been a manager of software development. I've been anything from a developer to CIO and everything in between. I've been operations side, development side. And because of that, it's given me a very large set of perspectives in terms of different industries and different things we've done. I love to kind of relate things to the real world when I can in my classroom. And I try to do that in every classroom with at least multiple examples. Because to me, if somebody can't kind of attach something in their real life to it, it becomes a little bit more difficult. It's just kind of like book stuff. And, while exams and certifications are valuable and certainly things that can sort of help us with our personal growth, at the end of the day, we have to then take that back and actually implement it. So more and more, I try to do that within my classrooms and things around that. As you can see, I also coach high school football on the side for fun. And it frequently do, whether it's webinars like this or actual presentations and work with different companies on sites, etc. One thing I will say, and New Horizons has a suite of classes. I will tell you that we always have the ability to customize around them. One of the things that I oftentimes get involved in is not only the daily day-to-day delivery of our classes, but also really those customization around some of those things. So with that, let me get into what kind of our focus here, right? We're talking about this idea of a software development lifecycle and the fact that there are lots of different variations of this. In fact, if I were to Google this, you'd probably see about 20 different versions of what this diagram could look like, right? All true, all representative. Everything has to kind of go through a process, right? That process usually involves some level of planning, some analysis of some sort of design around that. Eventually we go to start to implement it, right? That's where our project managers, our PMPs of the world really add value. And then we have to test it before we actually roll things out, so we don't end up putting something that's defective or something that's maybe not quite what we set our expectations to the customers in their hands, right? So our goal is try to get there, and then obviously it gets handed off into what I call the care and feeding stage, right? This is where our operations folks, where our ITIL stuff comes into the mix, rolling it out, it's care and support of that, and like I said, the care and feeding of our product long term. So that's our full life cycle that we have in the mix here. Now, there are lots of different ways we can go about it. And one of the things we're going to talk about is it doesn't really matter what type of life cycle you're using today. It could be something like what we're very commonly used to, right? A traditional waterfall approach, right? This is what the PMP stuff of the world. In fact, I got an older PMBOK, but I got my old PMBOK right here. The project manager's body of knowledge. This is what we certify project managers on, this entire consistent process. But notice what's at the very top here: requirements and planning and design, right? Some of that stuff we already talked about. Well, again, if this works really well when things are known and very stable and upfront, great, nothing wrong with it. Still works, okay? Still can be very used very effectively in businesses today. One approach. Another approach would be like a Six Sigma or a Lean Six Sigma approach. Some of us, when we're dealing with actual products, like maybe we're producing like markers or pens or physical products or things like that, or even products that could be of not substantive, like software and other things, right? Well, when we have defects, when we have things that are underperforming, a lot of times the Six Sigma world gives us the ability to track that, to work towards efficiencies, to work towards being more effective, to eliminate some of those variances, to eliminate those defects. And that's really where it's driven around. So this tends to be very problematic driven. Again, a very nice, effective way to be able to do this. Another way to implement things. And then Agile, right? This one's very popular nowadays. In fact, we sell lots of Agile classes and things around it, just like we sold lots of PMP and lots of Lean Six Sigma classes. Well, Agile also helps us. But the benefit of Agile is we're trying to be more dynamic when things aren't as well defined. But guess what? At the end of the day, what we're going to talk about today doesn't matter whether you're doing traditional project management, whether you're doing Lean Six Sigma, whether you're doing Agile. There are things that we need to do to be effective as an organization in order to make sure that we are delivering the maximum value, that we are delivering things on time, that we're not going back and reworking things over and over and over again. And that's really going to be our focus. So regardless of how you approach, I mean, you guys might even be a hybrid approach where you have some combination of these things. It doesn't matter. All of the things that we're going to talk about today will apply in some fashion. Even in an Agile world where we're more dynamic in how we approach things, many organizations still don't take the time, the due diligence to understand what it is we're trying to do. And that's really where we're going to go with this. What is the problem, right? The quote unquote problem. Well, the problem is that requirements management is the source of our project failure. Yes, for projects that fail, how many do so result of poor requirements management? This is from it's dated, but again, it still applies here. It's not 10%, it's not 42%, and obviously it's not 100% because there's always other reasons why projects can fail. But 71% of our projects are failing because of lack of management of our requirements. Now, that can mean management of requirements is kind of a big sort of nebulous thing. We're going to talk about some of those things, but that goes back to some of the key things that we're going to need to do in order to be effective. And again, even if you're an Agile shop, and you're not doing super detailed, requirements where you're defining everything, you still have to go gather that information. We still have to resolve conflict. We still have to work through those things. And that's really where most organizations get themselves in trouble, that they end up not dealing with those things, where we have groups that are conflict. We have things that are not being listened to. So we might have input from various different parts of the business, but we're not listening to those things, or we're assuming one group's priorities are higher than another. These are all related to things. Now, we're also going to talk about the fact that organizations oftentimes get themselves in trouble because they don't really understand and have the groundwork necessary and a solid foundation before they go out and start to really, really make changes. And I preach this over and over and over again in my classes. We should never, ever, ever be making a change to something that we don't understand. And I always kind of equate it to them. I say, look, think about your knowledge the first day you were on your job. Like you're a new hire, you were kind of like, I think I kind of know how this works. You probably did some onboarding process, met with your boss, right? They kind of gave you the lay of the land. Well, over time, you kind of really learn how things are really done, right? The norm of things. Well, those things are very different. And if you happen to be somebody who's going to make a change in an area that you don't have that knowledge of, it's very problematic. And it happens a lot in the real world over and over again. The other big problem that we have, and the other big thing that is, again, really shows itself in the end product that we deliver. And I love, this is one of my favorite statistics. And this is a real report and a study that showed what percentage of features is ultimately delivered are rarely or never used by the product end user. It's not 35. It's not 45. And believe it or not, it's not 55. Yes, 65% of the features that you actually deliver. So if we're building the latest and greatest, whatever it is, mobile app, right? We're saying that 65% of those features that you're building into that product are never or rarely used at all. Think about all the time, money, and effort that is wasted in that. And I believe the stat is that the never part of the rarely, 49% of the 65%, right? So is actually never. So we're almost to half. We're spending way too much time building stuff, right, that we didn't, first of all, take the time to understand, do we need it? We're building stuff that we didn't take the time to understand when there was conflict in two groups that didn't see eye to eye, which always happens anytime we bring multiple different groups within an organization or different customers to the table. We didn't resolve those things. And the net effect is we end up with a product that we spent a bunch of time and effort on that's probably going to underperform, fail to deliver the value we're looking for. And so the net effect is what? Rework, rework, rework. There is I love to tell my classes, pay me now or pay me a lot more later. There is an inherent pressure that we always put on the folks in our early on. And in fact, let's go back to our life cycle here. If we go all the way back to the early stage of this, right? There is a pressure to hurry, 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 right? We want to get into the implementation and building stage of things. Well, that's great. The problem is by doing that, it means we didn't take the time to understand where we are. We didn't take the time to understand the groundwork necessary in order to be able to enable those things. And the net effect is we may deliver something. It's probably going to fail to meet what the customer actually needed. We're going to build a bunch of stuff, as we just saw previously, 65% of features seldom are never used. And the end result is, guess what? We're going probably back to the drawing board and we're going to end up redoing stuff. We're going to have to redefine things because the value wasn't there. And so ultimately, the rework that goes into this is something that will always happen if we don't take the time up front. And if you look at this chart, and I know it's a little blurry here at the bottom with this piece, but early on, we can make changes without significant cost, right? And that's the idea. Work through this stuff early on. Later on, then it doesn't become so costly when we get problems in the hands of our customers. And I don't care whether it's a software release, and you could take anything from like an Android or Apple release that's gone bad to Microsoft patching things to, in the software world, to vehicles, right? I mean, I'm located in southeastern Michigan. And so I've got the big three in my backyard. And anytime there's a recall, what is that? That's rework. That's problems getting in the hands of our customers. And it means we probably didn't do all the due diligence up front. So it's a big red flag for us. If we start to see that we have to go back and redo things over and over and over, or we're failing to deliver the value, that means we need to slow that train down and really need to focus on how to get things better. So how do we go about that? Well, that's where business analysis really comes to, as I put here, business analysis to the rescue, right? Business analysis is something that doesn't replace project management. It complements it. In fact, project managers oftentimes are wearing business analyst hats and vice versa. It happens very often. But at the end of the day, if you go get a PMP that's been trained as a project manager professional, that book has very few pages in there about requirements. And that's the point. It is one of the biggest success factors, as we just saw. 71% of our project fails because of requirements management, yet it's not included in the basic training of project management professionals because of the fact that BAs really, that's what we do. We're there to complement project managers. And so this is really out of a organization. We're going to talk about this here in a minute. This book, this big orange book called the Babak, this is and we'll talk about it here in a minute. This is a book that defines business analysis. It is what the class suite that we're looking to present is based upon, okay? And so they define business analysis as, and there's some key words I like to say, facilitating change, absolutely. And again, that change could be to solve a problem, could be taking advantage of an opportunity, could be to align my organization to some higher level purpose, goal, objective, whatever it is. But it's by doing that, by eliciting the needs of our stakeholders. So that means we're going to gather and listen to those needs and then figure out what is the best solution approach while maximizing the value to my customers. Yeah, I might have 5 or 6 different approaches I can take. And I might have one that my organization is very comfortable with because we, quote unquote, always do it a certain way. But does that mean that I'm giving the greatest value possible? Does that mean I'm literally identifying all the possible solution options? Maybe, maybe not. BAs are there to make sure that happens. We evaluate, I always like to say, all possibilities. So what are some of the responsibilities a BA does? And I kind of just threw this in there just because I didn't know different audience. We might have different perspectives on this. This is kind of just the core of what a BA does, right? They have to understand and analyze a business problem. And again, like I said, could be a problem, could be an opportunity. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a few minutes. They got to elicit and document the requirements. That is the second class in that suite of classes that we're looking for. How do I gather information? And yes, how do I resolve that stuff? And how do I write it in such a way that everybody's going to understand it? I don't care whether you're entry level end user or CEO or CIO or everywhere in between. I've got to be able to communicate in that such a way that it can be understood by all. So effective communication, manage relationships, facilitate discussions, negotiate and build consensus. Again, kind of being that, I always like to say it's like being a coach or a referee or a liaison, a facilitator. Right? Yeah, I got to model data and process because I got to understand where things are. We're going to talk more about that here in a minute. And yeah, I've got activities to plan and manage, just like a project manager does in order to build this thing. I've got activities that I've got to plan and manage in order to be able to get things done, right? And then ultimately, the strategy we're going to align to and manage organizational change, right? That the organization may or may not be ready to make changes. Lots of organizations say they're ready to make changes, but we run into walls in terms of them not being willing to make those changes. So that's certainly part of what we're going to have to do. Again, the IIBA, as I mentioned to you before, puts out this big orange book. Check it out. All of the classes that we teach here are primarily based on the IIBA. They do crossover as well with PMI. In fact, PMI tried to buy IIBA a while back. And this book is really broken up into what we call 6 knowledge areas. These classes that we're going to be presenting as a suite are meant to address the focus points of these knowledge areas and really highlight the areas where a lot of organizations fall short of some of those things. So how do we go about doing that, and what do these things mean? Well, let's start with the 3 classes that are in this suite of classes we're trying to, or series of classes we're trying to put together. Right, the first one we're going to talk about here is called strategic business analysis. We'll talk about what that is. The second one's going to be eliciting and writing effective requirements. And the third class is user acceptance testing for business analysis and what that means. And again, too often we overlook one or more of these areas, which is where we then fall short, right? We might have said, hey, this is what we're going to give the customer, and we just quite didn't get there. That's ultimately what we need to do in terms of how we're going to deliver this and ultimately how we're going to present this in a way so that we can make sure those gaps are identified. And hey, maybe you're going to learn a little bit more about some of the areas that you are doing a good job in as well. Other little tips and things along the way. Let's talk about the first class. All right, so strategic business analysis. I tell people this is a great class in that it lays the foundation for any type of project life cycle you're going to take. I don't care, again, whether you're doing traditional project management. I don't care whether you're doing agile. Okay. It doesn't matter. We have to understand where we are today, what are our current capabilities, right? How we can apply those capabilities and where are we going, while also thinking about our long-term and short-term goals and objectives and strategies for our organization, right? This is where organizations oftentimes jump this step. And this is where our first misstep happens in terms of successful on-time launches, getting things off the ground and everything that goes with that, okay? Part of this is where we assume too much. It is not uncommon, and I have students all the time in my class like, oh, yeah, my boss or my boss or my customer will tell me, you know, here's the problem, and then they'll oftentimes give me the solution, and I just run with it. Well, that means we just said, I don't need to worry about all of this stuff, right? I don't need to worry about what the current state looks like. What's going on in my enterprise today, right? I don't need to know if even the need exists. Just because my customer says there's a problem, is that true? Maybe, maybe not. Customers are usually always right. But at the end of the day, I've got to be able to take the time, and it doesn't have to be a long period of time, but I have to understand what's going on. Because by properly defining the business need, again, that problem or opportunity, or that tactical or strategic importance of something, then I can give my project purpose. I give it direction. It helps me define the why and what we're trying to do. Without that, a lot of times what happens is we get into requirements and other things, we get pulled all sorts of different ways. We lose sight of the prize at the end of the tunnel, which is our future state, right? And this is whether or not we should actually pursue it. This really becomes that justification. Oftentimes, this also is part of that business case process, right? And being able to satisfy that and get ourselves into a better place. And so ultimately, we want to make sure that we can satisfy that need and we address that. Well, we got to define that. That's what we're going to focus on there. We're going to focus on understanding the need, talk about what needs to happen at a high level to support that. We do not write requirements in this class because we should not be jumping into writing requirements until we properly understand and have a great foundation of where we're at. So and I love the word, it provides context to the business analysis work to be performed once a project is approved. Yes, once you've justified it, we got it approved, that means we've done the level set. We've established where we are today. We're established where we're going. Right now, it's just figuring out how to navigate between those two. I always say it's kind of like a race. My starting line, my finish line, how am I going to navigate it? Well, there might be multiple different ways to go about that. We got to figure out how to make that happen while also thinking about where is my organization going, both short-term and long-term, right? Oftentimes I talk about in this class as well, understanding organizations, kind of who they are. You know, what is your why statement? Why do you exist? What's your purpose? Oftentimes organizations lose sight of that. And then when we make changes and initiatives, you know, we can easily lose sight of it. Now, yeah, if you suddenly have to do something because you have to be compliant, there isn't a lot of justification that goes into the mix, but I still have to understand where I am and where I'm going. And if there's an opportunity for me to make a change that may push me to where I was headed in a 3-year plan, why not make that change now? Because I'm being forced to do that because of other reasons beyond my control. So certainly something we need to examine. And part of what we do, there's that level set. So strategic business analysis is about laying that groundwork. Okay, so that's the first class. Second class, we transition into writing and eliciting requirements. Well, I've got to go out and gather information, right? I got to, as we talked about, I got to collect from all sorts of different people, right? And if I miss something, if I miss talking to somebody, or if I misunderstand something, like if I was gathering information from Joe about something and I just misunderstood it, right? Now I've got information that's incorrect, and I could then take that and merge it with good information. So part of this is confirming information. It's the analysis. It's the resolution of conflict. It's the prioritization. It's the separation of nice to haves from must haves. And then it's also making sure that we are writing them in such a way that we get people to a common understanding, right? I have to be able to, and I don't care whether you're technical or not, I have to write things in such a way that whether you're a business leader or an entry-level person or some technical person in between, that we can all understand what's going on. And because everything that we're going to build the product based on, my project management team, right? And the project manager and all the people who are going to build this product, developers and testers and everything associated with it, are going to base that information based on those requirements. Again, if there's something like we just talked about, missing or wrong or poor representation is going to lead to what we talked about earlier, right? It's going to lead to lots of rework over and over and over and over again, right? Because I'm missing information. And that's what happens when we have this pressure to hurry up and to move things along. That's where we get ourselves into trouble. And that's where ultimately we're going to miss the mark in terms of this. So how do I get through that? Well, I also have to write things in such a way that can be understood by all, which is easier said than done. I always tell all of the business analysts in my class, I'm like, you have the toughest job out there, because trying to bring somebody to a common understanding of the requirements is the single most difficult thing. Yeah, I can write technical jargon and the technical people are like, yeah, this is great. And the business people are going to be like, what is this? It means nothing to me. Right. And then I can be super high level and the technical people are like, well, there's not enough detail here. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. You got to find that balance. Right. And we break things down into different categories, how we go about things. We'll talk about business requirements. We'll talk about stakeholder requirements. We'll talk about functional requirements, non-functional requirements, talk about transition requirements, all of those things and breaking them down. And then we'll discuss things like business rules, technical requirements, and things like that that would then be used by folks that would actually go and build the product. And this is the thing I always challenge is, and you can go back to any of the folks in your organization and ask them this question today. Hey, if we took your requirements you're writing today and I handed them to a partner or a vendor or an offshore developer, could they build the product we're looking for based on those requirements? If the answer is yes, then you're doing a great job as a BA. If they have to come back with 42 million questions, which oftentimes happens where we got meetings to have meetings to have meetings, then it means we're probably missing the mark in terms of how we're selling this and how we're writing this, and the effectiveness of what we're trying to do is not there. Okay, so at the end of the day, we have to make sure we're in a good place in terms of that. So that is what we'll cover. That is 3 days. We go through all sorts of techniques. You guys will write requirements in this class. We will talk about evaluation of those things, also things called verification and validation, which sets us up for our next set of class, which is user acceptance testing. And this one is one that ironically isn't as popular, but is when I get folks in this class probably walk away and go, you know what? This was the best thing I've had in a long time, because it attaches this idea of the requirements that I just got done writing in all my other stuff, and now feeding my user acceptance testing. No, I'm not talking about unit integration and all these other different levels of tests. I'm talking about user acceptance testing. So what does that mean? That means actually putting an end user, putting a business person into this product and saying, hey, does this do what you need it to do? Yes or no? It's simple. It's a yes, no thing. It's not a yeah, sort of, maybe, right? Well, if those things are happening, that means we missed the mark in terms of requirements. We didn't fully understand the problem. We failed short. We were pushing ourselves for time. And now we're going to come back and do rework, right? So the question is it sufficient and correct for business usage? Yes or no? And this is really what the focus of this class is. We'll talk about basics of testing. We get into we talk about something called the V model. And as you can see, our requirements and specifications feed our acceptance testing. It's a direct correlation, which means business analysts are great candidates to help us with user acceptance testing. No, I'm not talking about system testing and integration testing and unit testing. I've got developers and testing folks to do those things, right? But at the end of the day, somebody from the business has to say, yeah, this does what I asked you to do, yes or no. And that's really what it comes down to. And so we'll go into this V model, we'll talk about it. And it's really about, how is the BA a good fit for this? Well, they understand how things operate because they had to gather that information in our strategic planning piece, right? They have knowledge of the business. They understand where we're going. They understand the need itself, right? And ultimately, they have the ability that it's going to validate and verify that not only is of sufficient quality, but the validation that it does what it needs to do so I can actually use it in my day-to-day operation. And this is the single most important step that unfortunately a lot of times, and if you follow this V model, you'll notice it kind of goes downward and then we're going upward. Unfortunately, because this is the last step in our process before we actually look to roll this out into our live production environment, oftentimes we are squeezed for time. Maybe you had a deadline, a due date, right? And there was a lot of pressure and things were delayed and delayed and delayed. So unfortunately, a lot of times this acceptance testing takes on other things. Maybe we didn't do complete unit integration and system testing. So a lot of times we get some of those things to creep into that. That's not it's our intent here. Our intent is to say, does this do what I need to do or not? Right. And at the end of the day, if it's a no, then it shouldn't be rolled out. Right. I know nowadays with, like Office 365 and Adobe and Google and all these different companies that have these products that are SaaS, software as a service, where if they have a problem, they just update or roll out an update. And it feels like we're a little bit more of those beta testers. But at the end of the day, we have to be able to make sure that our customers feel confident about what we're rolling out. I don't know about you, but the last time I was on Amazon.com, I didn't have any problems with their website. They deploy changes in a live environment thousands of times a day. I'd say they've got their stuff together in terms of what they're trying to do. Now, that's more of a DevOps world, a little beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, but certainly the idea is it's an assurance that, hey, we're going to be able to do what we need to do. And so the last thing that we really do is we focus on in this class is this idea that from a business scenario down to a UAT test plan, where we come up with UAT scenarios, user acceptance testing objectives, and then we come up with user acceptance test cases. We will actually go through the whole process in that class of developing not only UAT scenarios and UAT objectives, but you'll actually develop UAT test cases as well, so that people will feel comfortable with what that is. And you can then go through that process. And we actually even go through the process of recording something that isn't working correctly, so we can see how that is in that class. And again, it's a nice tie-in back to, did we meet the requirements? Yes or no? Does it do what we needed to do or not? And so that's really where they get that full life cycle. And by doing these three focused areas, that puts us in a really good place to have things beyond time. It forces us to think about things so we're not constantly doing the rework and the whole, like I said earlier, pay me now or pay me a lot more later. We're trying to avoid the later. We're trying to get things into a better place now. So at the end of the day, what are we trying to do? We're trying to drive success and higher performance in your projects by doing multiple things. Number one, understand your why, understand your goals and objectives, understand your current state, right? Understand your future state, understand your business need. Make sure we understand how to categorize right effective requirements. And again, bring people to that common understanding, which means I got to manage them. I got to confirm things. I got to resolve conflict. I got to prioritize. I got to separate nice to have from must have, so I don't end up with 65% of my features being seldom or never used. And then ultimately, we're going to build test cases, user acceptance test cases, to validate that, hey, this does what we need it to do or not. And then and only then should we feel confident moving it over to our operations team and starting to worry about the governance, risk, compliance folks, and all the things that need to go into that, so that we can roll that stuff out to our operational stuff. And at the end of the day, we can say, yep, evaluate how it will be used in our day-to-day. Is it work? Yes or no, right? And that's ultimately what we're trying to do. And so these three classes we've pulled out of all these different ones to kind of highlight how you can really be effective and ultimately deliver value sooner. Now, you might say, well, it sounds like this is a process. Here's the thing. I get people all the time. It goes back to what we said, pay me now, pay me a lot more later. If you don't take the time up front, you're still going to take the time. You're still going to have that time expenditure, even if it's past the due date. You're just going to end up with rework. And unfortunately, you may end up with unhappy customers. We live in this app world where if your mobile phone app doesn't do what you want, what happens? We delete it, we move on. Well, customers are like that with everything now. So we can't just roll out garbage because they're going to move on to something else. We've got to be more effective in how we go about things. And so what they've done is Joe has put together a great package here. Normally, again, this works out to something like $4,785 per student for these three classes. They've discounted this up. The first class of BA02 is a 2-day class. The BA04 is a 3-day class, and BA29 is a 2-day class. And from a scheduling standpoint, we have open enrollment stuff on some of those things. And certainly as more and more requests for those things come up, we can certainly add more capacity for those things as well. So with that, what, if any, questions do you guys have?
Hey, this is Joe. I have one question here from
Yep.
chat. Obviously, we want all folks to take all 3 classes. I think that's kind of our recommended package.
Correct.
The question here, though, is if you could only take one class, if you only had time for one class, which class would be the most valuable class?
That's a hard one because of the fact that I don't know where you're at. Like, here's my answer to you. If you are a person who is more downstream, meaning you're not like a project's already been initiated and you've kind of already are just kind of joining the team to kind of do the requirements gathering, then the BA04 probably makes sense. If you are part of that group that actually has to define the problem, that has to clearly articulate what has to happen, what problem we're trying to solve, maybe even making a business case or something like that, then the BA02 would be the entry point. Obviously, the 29 class only comes if you're on the backside, your requirements are good, but you're finding out that you're not oftentimes rolling out a successful product. Well, what the problem is in 29 is a good class. It's a strong class, but it kind of assumes we've done some of the other stuff leading up to that. If we didn't do that due diligence, that's a hard entry point to jump into unless you're just somebody who's purely on the testing side. So my answer is I would always start with 02, unless, of course, you're a little bit more downstream. Then I would jump into the BA04. If you want to learn how to write effective requirements, gather requirements, learn how to do like interviews, workshops, brainstorming sessions, categorize and write requirements, put together a BRD, a business requirement document, then the 3-day BA04 would be a better entry point for that. So it kind of just depends on what your point is. We brought those together for a reason because it's a good combination. Understand not everybody can swing all 7 days total there of classes, but at the end of the day, if you had to pick one, I would probably do the 04 if you're just a pure BA gathering requirements and writing requirements. Good question.
Okay, I think that should take care of that question. The only other question here is, do you offer these in a private class setting? And I thought I could take that one. In general, all of these classes are on our public open enrollment schedule. They're available as what we call in New Horizons world online live, which basically means it's a live class led by a real trainer such as Pete with live students, real people in the class. It just occurs over Zoom. So online live, virtual instructor-led training class over Zoom. But we also do these, on-site at client locations as well. We can also host a private event at one of our centers in Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, or Albany. So there's, any number of different permutations for class delivery, I would say. Best part about working with New Horizons is you can kind of tell us what you're thinking and we can tell you if it'll work or not. So likely we're able to help you no matter what class format you want this in. So that's good.
And the only comment I would make to that too is if it is a customized, dedicated class, we can also kind of tweak things to your examples. And that's the nice part. If it's one company instead of being open enrollment, then obviously we have the luxury of now saying, hey, let's use your examples instead of a generic one. So I oftentimes will use your templates and other things in those dedicated deliveries. So we can certainly customize around that as well.
Good. I think that wraps up all the questions we have. I want to thank everybody for jumping on either this live session or anyone who's listening to the recorded version. Thanks so much for joining us. Like I said at the top of the call, we're really happy to help with really any software launch or any software project that's going on, at your organization. I think that these 3 classes that Pete talked about and really some of the bigger topic areas that Pete talked about at the beginning of the call, Lean Six Sigma, Agile, just general business analysis, right, is what we're talking about here. These are all topic areas that we're really excited to help organizations with locally, and hopefully we can do that as we hopefully move out of COVID and spin ourselves into summer here in upstate New York. So Pete, thank you very much for doing this webinar with us and for working with us and being a great partner for us. We appreciate it. And thank you everyone who joined on the call or is listening to the recorded version. We appreciate it. Talk to everybody soon. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.